This is my solution to problem 1 of the LeetCode challenges called 2sum. Before I begin, I'm going to quickly read out the description. So, given an array of integers nums and an integer target, return indices of the two numbers such that they add up to target. You may assume that each input would have exactly one solution, and you may not use the same element twice. You can return the answer in any order. And I've started off by initializing two separate variables. The first one is nums, which is just an array of numbers, and target, which is a value. And I'm going to set target to 9 for now. And for this solution, the way I've written my function is I've used a brute force approach. And this is by no means the best approach, but it was my first attempt at this question, and I'm just typing it out as a record of what I've done today as my first attempt. And maybe I'll come back to this problem a bit later once I've improved and done a couple more challenges to see how my solution improves as well. So I've used a brute force approach, and the way I've done my solution is I've looped through the array, and so I've looped through every single element. So in this array we have 2, 7, 11, and 15, and so I've started the first loop to loop through 2, then to 7, 11, and so on. And then I've done a nested loop, and the nested loop looks at every element after the element of the first loop. So in the first loop, if we're looking at 2, the nested loop then looks at 7, 11, and 15. And then what I've tried to do is I've subtracted these numbers respectively from target, and then as soon as target gets to 0, I know I've hit the exact pair of numbers which I need, and then I return the indices of the for loops, of the two nested for loops. So I'll show you the code in action. So to begin, I'll just define a function which I'll call 2sum, which is just the name of the problem. And this takes two inputs, which I'll call nums and target, which are just the array and target value respectively. Now in the function, the first thing I want to do is I'll figure out what the length of the list is. So I'll call that list_len and use the len function on our array to figure out the length of the array. Now, the first loop is I'll do a for I in range of list_len. So that loops through every single element of our list. And then inside this loop, I'm going to initialize a variable which we'll call temp_sum. And this is the target, whatever the target is. So in this case, it's 9. And I'm going to subtract the element that we're at. So our array is nums, and the element we're at in the for loop is element I. So in the first loop, this will be 2, then 7, 11, and 15, and so on. So in our first loop, when I is 0, num0 gives us 2. So temp_sum is equal to 9 minus 2, which gives us 7. And then now I'll move on to the nested loop. So the nested loop, I'll write up a new loop. So for j in range. Now, like I said, this nested loop doesn't look through every element. It looks through every element after the one we're currently at. The one we're currently at is I, right? Depending on whatever iteration of the I loop we're in. So instead of going from I to the end, I'm going to go from I plus 1, which is the very next element, to the end. So I'll loop through to list_len. So that's our nested loop. There we go. And then now in this one, I'm going to do a final sum. So this is just another variable I'm initializing. And this final sum, what I'll do is then I'll subtract from temp_sum, which is what we have above, the element we're currently at now. So for this one, it's the same premise as above. So I'll subtract nums I, but in this loop, we use j as our iterator. So I'm subtracting nums j. So over here, I then want to do a check. So if final sum is equal to 0, that essentially means that the sum of the two numbers, nums I and nums j, is equal to our target, because when we subtract them both from target, if we get 0, I'm sort of working in an opposite direction. So rather than doing the addition of the two numbers to get to the target, I'm starting with the target, subtracting the two numbers, and if we get 0, then it means we've got our number. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to include a print statement just to print out the indices, which are I and j. You don't have to, because the LeetCode challenge doesn't ask you to print anything. It just asks you to return the numbers. So we have to include a return statement at the end, but I'll just include a print as well. I like having the visual check. Now, I included a break statement here as well, because if our final sum is equal to 0, it means we've found our pair, so we break out of the j loop. Now, we also need to break out of our I loop, because if we only include one break statement, we will continue iterating through the rest of the i's, if there are any I iterations. So I'm also going to do a check over here. So final sum is equal to 0. I want to break from this as well. And then because this is a function, we do have to return something. So outside of both loops, I'm going to return I and j. And then just to test that this works, I'm going to call the function and give it nums and target, which we've initialized up here at the top. And if I run this code, we should see that it works. And I've run this before, so I think the terminal should still have my previous attempt, which it does up here. But the most recent attempt gives us the answers 0 and 1 for I and j. And as we can see, 0 and 1 gives us the elements 2 and 7. Adding them together does actually give us 9. So we know the code works. And just to test out a couple more things, let's test out 18. So we should get 1 and 2. So if I save this and then run this in the terminal, you can see we also get 1 and 2. Now I'm going to test one more value. I'm going to test 17. 17, we can see that it's 2 and 15 that must be added together to give us 17. So our answer, the values in the terminal for I and j should be 0 and 3. So if I run this in the terminal, I get 0 and 3 again. So the code does work. I guess I might have to run a couple more test cases just to see if it works for everything. But before I wrap up the video, I do want to mention a couple of things. For this solution, like I said before, it's not the best solution. It runs in order of n squared time complexity. And n squared isn't very good for something like this. There is a better solution, which I saw on the LeetCode website, which uses hash tables or dictionaries in the Python language. And this increases the space complexity because we have to store the values we've currently visited in a dictionary or a hash table, but it decreases the time complexity to just order of n because we're only looping through the list one time. I might make a separate video in the future using a hash table, and I think I might revisit this problem in the future and attempt it again just to see how I've improved. But for now, this is the solution I came up with for problem 1 of the LeetCode challenges.